This really happened to me, and I still feel the weight of it every single day. It is some tale I plucked out of thin air. It's the hardest chapter of my life, and what I did afterward is the only reason I can even tell it now. The first time I realized something was wrong was in the county clerk's office in downtown Columbus, Ohio. My hands were shaking as I held the thick folder of paperwork, the fluorescent lights humming above me like a swarm of bees. The clerk tapped her nails against a sheet, then slid it across the counter with a sympathetic look. My son's name was printed there, his signature looping bold at the bottom. He had signed away the deed to my house, the home I'd worked my whole life to pay off, without a single word to me. My son, my flesh and blood, had taken my life's work and sold it out from under me. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I didn't know it then, but that day would spark the most grueling, humiliating war I had ever fought. My story isn't just about betrayal, it's about discovering how much cruelty can hide in someone you love, and how far a man will go when he has nothing left to lose. I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son would become my enemy. His name is Mark, and he was supposed to be the one person I could trust after his mother passed. Cancer took her when he was only 8. I raised him alone. Every scraped knee, every missed homework assignment, every birthday candle. I was there. I worked myself half to death at the steel plant off Parsons Avenue, taking extra shifts, inhaling smoke and sweat, just to make sure he had what he needed. Back then, I promised myself 2 things: that Mark would never feel abandoned, and that I would pay off our house if it killed me. That 2-story place off Parsons was more than a building. It was my fortress, my wife's memory. My blood poured into every nail and beam. We had a cherry tree in the back she planted before she got sick. Every spring, it bloomed pink and white like a whisper from her. I thought I'd die in that house, maybe under that tree. But Mark, as he grew, something inside him hardened. When he was a boy, he used to curl up on the couch with me watching late-night baseball reruns. By his 20s, those nights were gone. He chased bigger things, always hungry, always convinced the world owed him more than what he'd earned. He jumped from job to job, salesman, mechanic, insurance agent, never lasting more than 6 months. He lived like every dollar in his pocket was already spent twice over. By 35, the debts piled high. Credit cards, gambling, shady investments in fly-by-night companies. He'd show up at my door with excuses, promising it was the last time he needed a little help, and every time I gave in. Because what else was I supposed to do? He was my son, my only family left. But you can only ignore the rot for so long before it spreads. The first sting of humiliation came at the Kroger on Whittier Street. An old church friend, Margaret, leaned over her cart and asked me in a hushed voice, "Earl, is it true you're moving out of your house?" The bag of frozen peas in my hand dripped down my arm. What I asked. She gave me a look of pity that cut deeper than any insult. "Well, that's what folks are saying, that you sold it." "I'm so sorry." I drove home that evening with her words echoing in my head. Sold my house. That was impossible. I kept every bill, every notice neatly stacked in a shoebox on the kitchen table. There were no foreclosure letters, no warnings. Still, unease clawed at me. The next morning I went downtown. I sat under those buzzing fluorescent lights, the smell of stale paper and coffee filling the clerk's office. I asked for a property record search, and when the woman slid that paper across the counter, my world collapsed. There it was, the deed transfer, signed not by me, but by markising a power of attorney. I had never given him a notarized document. My name scribbled in shaky ink. It looked almost like my signature, but I knew my hand. It was forged. I stumbled out of that office into the blinding sunlight, leaning against a lamppost, while the city spun around me. Cars honked, buses roared past. People hurried along, and none of them knew my life had just been gutted. At 72 years old, I was suddenly homeless. That night, I drove to Mark's apartment on Livingston Avenue. The building reeked of mildew paint peeling from the doors. I pounded until my fists throbbed. He finally opened, leaning against the frame with a smug grin. "Dad," he said, casual as if nothing had happened. I was gonna explain. Explain. My voice cracked, rage and grief crashing together. "You forged my name. You stole my house." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, you weren't using it the way you should. It was just sitting there. I had an opportunity and I took it. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." Those words from the boy I raised sliced me to pieces. He looked at me with no shame, no regret, only arrogance. That night, I didn't go home. Because I didn't have a home, I parked my old Buick in the Walmart lot on Georgeville Road and lay there staring at the ceiling. The semis roared by on the freeway. The cold seeped through the windows, and humiliation burned in my gut. But beneath it, something else flickered, a stubborn ember. If he thought he could steal my life and walk away smiling, he had no idea who he was dealing with. That was the night I began planning my revenge. I spent the next few days drifting between disbelief and rage, unable to sleep, unable to eat. Every corner of Columbus seemed to mock me. When I drove past Parsons Avenue, I couldn't even turn my head toward the block where my house once stood. It was like looking at a gravestone I wasn't ready to accept. Harold, my cousin, took me in for a while. His small place on West Broad was cluttered with old fishing rods hunting trophies and the smell of fried onions that clung to the curtains. He set me up on his pull-out couch. "Stay as long as you need." "Earl," he told me, but I could see the pity in his eyes. I was 72 years old, and I'd gone from homeowner to couch surfer overnight. I felt humiliated. But humiliation has a way of sharpening a man's mind. The more I replayed Mark's smug grin in my head, the more I knew I couldn't just let it go. Still, I needed to understand the whole picture before I made my move. Mark had always been careless. Arrogant men usually err, and if I looked closely enough, I knew I'd see the cracks in his empire. So, I started digging. My first stop was the Franklin County Clerk's office again. The building was old with marble floors that echoed every footstep. I asked to see, not just the deed transfer, but all recent documents filed under my name and under Mark's. The young clerk, a man, maybe in his 30s with glasses sliding down his nose, pulled a stack of papers from the record system. When he slid them across the counter, I felt a strange mix of dread and curiosity. I sat at a long wooden table and read through each line, like I was deciphering scripture. The forgery was there, bold and brazen, a notarized power of attorney, supposedly signed by me, giving Mark complete authority over my property. The signature was mine, in name only. It wavered just wrong enough, the curl of the E too stiff. Whoever forged it had skill, but not enough to fool me. I looked at the notary stamp, a name I didn't recognize. Jennifer Albright, I wrote it down. Then came the sales contract for my house. The buyer was a shell company, Midwest, Revitalize LLC. No real address, just a P.O. box. I recognized the game. Mark had never been smart enough to build that alone. Someone else was pulling strings, or at least enabling him. And there was more. Other property sales tied to his name. Houses in disrepair, flipped fast, cash, exchanged under the table. 3, maybe 4 in the past year. My house had just been the crown jewel. When I left that building, The wind stung my face, but my mind burned hotter. Mark wasn't just greedy. He was reckless. He was playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. I spent afternoons at the Columbus Metropolitan Library on Grant Avenue. The tall windows let in cold winter light as I flipped through property databases tracing Mark's transactions. Sometimes I sat there until the librarians gave me polite looks that said, "Closing time." One evening I saw him, Mark, walking out of Big Mama's diner on Parsons Head, tilted back in laughter with two rough-looking men. One of them I recognized from church gossip rumor had it. He collected debts for a man named Big Joe out of Cleveland. I ducked behind my Buick and watched Mark handed the man an envelope, his hands shaking even as he grinned. The man counted the bills, then slapped Mark's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. They got into a black SUV and drove off, leaving my son standing in the cold with sweat on his brow. That was when it clicked. Mark hadn't stolen my house just for greed. He'd stolen it because he was desperate. He was drowning in debts so deep he was clawing for air, and my house had been his life. Raft, I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt a new kind of power, because desperation makes men sloppy, and sloppy men can be destroyed. Back at Harold's, I started keeping notes in an old spiral notebook. Dates, names, connections. I wrote down everything like, I used to track machinery repairs at the plant. Harold noticed. "You're obsessed, Earl," he muttered one night as we watched the news. "Maybe you should let the cops handle it. The cops don't care." I snapped. "They'll say it's a civil matter. Tell me to hire a lawyer I can't afford." "No, Harold, this is mine to handle." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Then handle it smart, and smart meant patience. The first confrontation came sooner than I expected. Mark showed up at Harold's one afternoon unannounced. He leaned against the doorframe like he owned the place. Smirk plastered across his face. "Dad," he said, "you're making this harder than it has to be. You're set. I gave you some cash from the deal. You should be thanking me." I felt my pulse pound in my temples. "Thanking you for stealing my home, for forging my name." He rolled his eyes like I was a child. "Your old dad. You don't get how the world works anymore." I made a move. You'd still be sitting in that dusty house wasting away if it weren't for me. "I'm setting us both up." "Setting us up," I spat. "Or setting yourself up." He shrugged. "Same thing, isn't it?" He walked away with that same swagger, leaving me shaking and Harold's living room fists clenched. But instead of despair, I felt something new. A spark. For weeks I'd been drowning in shame, but watching him leave so smug, so certain, I couldn't touch him. Something shifted. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't dead yet. That night, I opened Harold's junk drawer and pulled out an old yellow legal pad. I started making a plan. Not just vague thoughts, but a real roadmap. My handwriting was shaky, but each word steadied me. Find Jennifer Albright. Trace Midwest. Revitalize LLC. Gather proof. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about war. My first lead was the notary, Jennifer Albright. It took some digging phone calls, Google searches asking around, but I found her. She worked at a dingy payday loan office on the east side. I went there one cold morning, the parking lot cracked and half empty, the neon sign buzzing faintly. She was behind the counter, younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. Tired eyes chewing gum as she tapped at her computer. When I said my name, her face drained of color. "2. Don't know what you're talking about." She stammered when I asked about the notarization. I leaned in. "You signed off on a document that cost me my home. That's fraud. That's prison. But I'm not here to ruin you." "Not yet. I just need the truth. Did Mark coerce you?" Her hand trembled so badly she spilled her coffee. She looked around nervously, then whispered, "He said if I didn't help, people would come after me. He said it was all legal." People, I pressed. She clammed up, eyes darting like a cornered rabbit, but I didn't push further. Instead, I slid a napkin with Harold's number across the counter. "When you're ready to do the right thing, call me, because when this comes down, and it will, you'll want to be on the side of the truth." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. I walked out into the cold air with a grim smile. Piece by piece, the wall was starting to crack, but the first real blow that had to be perfect, and I had nothing but time. Mark's arrogance only grew in the weeks after I confronted the notary. He strutted around Columbus like he was a king who couldn't be toppled. I saw him one night on High Street, standing outside a bar, arms draped over two younger women, laughing loud enough for the whole block to hear. A leased Dodge Charger sat at the curb, its engine idling, bass thumping. He tossed $100 bills at the valet, like he was Rockefeller himself. To anyone else, it might have looked impressive. To me, it looked like desperation, dressed up in cheap cologne. I could see the cracks behind his smile, the twitch in his hands when he thought nobody was looking. He was running on borrowed time, and deep down, he knew it. That was when I realized his pride was his weakness. If I could wound it in front of the people he needed most, his so-called investors, his drinking buddies, the small-time crooks he was trying to impress, I could start to unravel him. I decided to bait him. One evening, I called him, my voice shaking deliberately. "Mark," I said, "I've been thinking. Maybe you were right. Maybe I can't handle money on my own anymore. I've got some savings left, but maybe I should let you manage it. You always said you could turn money into more. Maybe it's time I trust you." There was a long pause, and then his voice came back soft, almost mocking. "Now you're talking, Dad. You won't regret this." We set a meeting at a diner on High Street. I walked in wearing my old steel plant jacket, making sure I looked tired, beaten exactly how he wanted to see me. He was already in a booth, grinning like a wolf with fresh prey. "Glad you came to your senses," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Just some paperwork to make it official." I opened it slowly, pretending to struggle with the words. But inside, I was burning. Another power of attorney. This time granting him full control of my finances, every cent of what little I had left. I looked up. "You sure this is best for both of us?" He smirked, leaning back with his arms crossed. "Trust me, Dad. You'll be thanking me in no time." I nodded, folded the papers, and slipped them into my briefcase. "I'll think about it." His smile faltered. "Dad, come on. Don't back out now. We're on the verge of something big." I stood, gripping the briefcase. "He'll think about it," I repeated, steady as stone. That night, I photocopied every page. Proof black and white that he was still scheming. Proof that would hang him when the time came. But I needed more than just documents. I needed to break his illusion in front of others. That chance came sooner than I expected. Mark had been bragging about a business presentation at a downtown hotel, the Westin on South High Street. Word spread through whispers and flyers. An investment seminar, promises of generational wealth, and real estate opportunities. He invited friends Hangerson, even a couple of men I knew he owed money to. I slipped into the ballroom that evening, sitting quietly in the back. The chandeliers glowed. The carpet smelled faintly of wine and dust. Mark stood at the front, in a cheap suit, pacing the stage, like some second-rate motivational speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "this is the future property flipped and revitalized. Columbus is the next gold rush, and I'm leading the charge." He flashed slides of houses, some I recognized, including my own. He called them projects, bragged about quick turnarounds, promised returns that sounded too good to be true, because they were. People nodded, scribbled notes, clapped at his rehearsed jokes. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting. When the QA opened, I stood. My voice cut through the chatter. "Mark, can you explain how you managed to sell a house that wasn't yours to begin with?" The room went silent. His face drained of color. "Excuse me," he stammered. I stepped forward, holding up the photocopied deed, the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent contracts. Because according to these records from Franklin County, you forged my name, stole my house and sold it without my consent. Care to explain that to your investors? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted, recording Chelsea. The realtor he'd used was there too. Her eyes widened as she realized the truth. Mark tried to laugh it off, waving his hand. "That's not true. My father doesn't understand." But the room had already turned. One investor shouted, "This is fraud." Another stormed out. The men he owed money to exchanged looks, their jaws tightening. I left him there, stammering, sweating under the chandeliers, cornered by the very lies he thought would lift him up. That was the first strike. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. In the days after the fallout spread, Columbus is, no New York word travels fast. People started whispering. The investors who once toasted him at bars now avoided his calls. Chelsea cut ties, telling others she'd been misled. Even the local paper ran a piece. Troubled real estate deals linked to local man. But Mark didn't stop. Arrogance doesn't die that easily. He strutted into Harold's place one night trying to bluff Dad. "You think you've won something. All you did was embarrass yourself. Nobody's gonna take the word of some old man over me. I've got connections." I leaned forward, my voice low. "No, son. What you've got is a rope around your neck, and every lie you tell, every deal you make, you're pulling it tighter." For the first time, his smile cracked. Just a flicker. But I saw it. Fear. And I knew then that the next blow had to come from the law itself. I called Samantha Price. She was a lawyer I'd known through a church friend. Sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in elder fraud. When I laid out the documents, the notes, even the napkin with the notary's confession scribbled on it, her eyes hardened. "Mr. Harris," she said, "this isn't just forgery. This is systemic fraud. If we can tie this together, we're talking years in prison." Her words lit something in me. Revenge wasn't just a dream anymore. It was within reach. But Samantha warned me. Men like your son think they're smarter than the system. If we're going to nail him, we need airtight proof. Bank records, victim testimonies, the works. I leaned back in her office chair, gripping the briefcase on my lap. Then let's make it airtight. That night I sat on Harold's couch, staring at the ceiling again. Only this time I wasn't humiliated. I was resolved. Mark thought he could erase me, take everything I built, and walk away laughing. But he didn't understand. The old man he thought was weak had been forged in fire long before he was born, and I was going to end him. The morning after my meeting with Samantha, I walked down High Street with a new kind of energy in my step. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. My son thought I was finished. Thought he'd buried me under the weight of forged signatures and empty promises. But now I had a weapon, the law, and with Samantha guiding me, I was going to wield it like a blade. She started by pulling strings I never could have. Within a week, subpoenas went out for Mark's. Bank records, phone logs, and transaction histories. She told me to keep collecting everything I could, dates, names, even overheard conversations. Every scrap matters. She said fraud cases are built like houses. You need every brick in place before the roof can stand. So I became a builder again in my own way. I carried my worn leather briefcase everywhere. Inside it, copies of deeds, affidavits, photographs of notarized signatures, I treated it like a weapon. Every time I slid a new piece of paper into it, I felt like I was loading another bullet. But evidence wasn't enough. Samantha explained it clearly one night, as we sat in her office, the city lights glowing through the blinds. Earl, we need to bait him. Men like your son can't resist another scam. If we give him rope hell, hang himself with it. And this time, we'll be watching. That was how the plan for the fake account was born. Harold scraped together a few thousand from his savings, and with Samantha's help, we created an account in my name. Just enough money to tempt Mark, but not enough to ruin us if it disappeared. We set up safeguards, so every attempted transaction would trigger a fraud alert directly to the bank and to Samantha. All I had to do was dangle it in front of him. I called him one chilly evening, my voice soft, almost pleading. Mark, I've been thinking. You always said you could grow money, that you knew the right people. Maybe I should give you one last chance. On the other end of the line, I could hear him smiling. You won't regret this, Dad. Trust me, I've got something big in the works. Just give me access, and he'll turn it around for us. The bait was set. Within days, he tried to transfer the funds into one of his shell companies, Columbus Revitalize LLC, nearly identical to the earlier one. The bank froze. The transaction instantly flagged it as fraud and documented every detail. Another nail for Samantha to hammer home in court. But I wasn't done. I wanted to break him, not just legally but socially. His entire identity was built on the illusion of power, the smirk, the fast car, the promises of wealth. If I stripped that away in front of his followers, he'd have nothing left. So I began planting seeds. I visited Chelsea, the realtor he'd used in his schemes. She looked weary, her once polished smile dulled by disappointment. Chelsea, I said, laying photocopies of the forged deed on her desk. You've been dealing with my son. You know better than anyone how he operates. When this goes to court, I need you to speak up. She glanced at the papers, then at me. For a moment, I saw shame flicker across her face. Mr. Harris, I didn't know. Not at first. By the time I realized I was already knee-deep, I leaned forward. Then here's your chance to make it right. Her hands shook, but she nodded. He'll testify one by one. I tracked down his victims, a young couple barely in their 20s who'd nearly lost their down payment on a house Mark never intended to sell. An older landlord who'd been promised renovations that never materialized. Each story was another brick in the wall I was building. And then there was Jennifer the notary. I found her again this time at a Waffle House on Livingston. She looked more fragile than before, her hands trembling as she stirred cream into her coffee. I can't go to court, she whispered. When I asked if his people find out, they won't, I interrupted firmly. Samantha will protect you. But if you don't speak, you're complicit. You know what he did was wrong, and you know men like him don't stop until someone makes them. Her eyes filled with tears, but she finally nodded. He'll do it. The pressure began to show on Mark. I saw him one evening at a Starbucks on Polaris Parkway. He walked in jittery sunglasses on indoors, his once confident swagger reduced to nervous pacing. When he spotted me at a corner table, he forced a smile and sat across from me. Dad, he said, voice strained, I heard about your little stunt at the hotel. Not cool. You're making enemies you don't understand. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. The only enemy here is you, Mark. And you've underestimated me for the last time. He laughed, but it was hollow. You think anyone's gonna believe an old man over me? I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of his attempted bank transfer affidavits from victims, Jennifer's written statement. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. This is the end, I said calmly. You stole my house. You forged my name. You thought I was weak, but I've built stronger things than you'll ever know. And now you're about to watch it all come crashing down." For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not long after the sheriff's deputies came, it was a cold morning when they pulled up to his apartment complex, neighbors watching from porches and windows. Mark stumbled out in handcuffs, shouting protests, his smug grin nowhere to be found, the mighty Mark Harris brought low. But as satisfying as that moment was, I knew the real war wasn't over. The courtroom would be the battlefield, and I would have to watch every detail unfold. And in that room, under the eyes of a jury, I was going to make sure my son's empire of lies collapsed completely. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. I'd spent most of my life far from places like this, where suits whispered strategies in hallways, and bailiffs spoke in clipped commands. But now it felt like the stage for the final act of my life's cruelest play. Mark shuffled into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, eyes darting like a trapped animal. For years, he'd been the one walking tall, smirking, lording his supposed brilliance over me. Now he looked small, still arrogant. He couldn't help it, but diminished. The prosecutor, a sharp young man named Collins, laid it out plain in his opening remarks. This is a case about betrayal, about a son who exploited his own father, forging documents to strip him of the only home he had, then selling it to cover debts from schemes and lies. Every word cut like glass. But I sat straighter in my chair. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was justice unfolding in front of strangers who would soon see the truth. The witnesses began. Chelsea, the realtor, testified first. She wore a navy blazer, her voice steady but tinged with regret. Yes, she admitted, I worked with Mark Harris on several property transactions. At first, I believed his paperwork was legitimate. But when I discovered inconsistencies in signatures and timing, I confronted him. He assured me it was fine. I now realize I was misled. The defense tried to paint her as incompetent, but she held firm. I was misled, she repeated, and I would not have participated had I known the truth. Next came the young couple. They clutched hands as they took the stand, their voices trembling. We gave him $12,000 as a down payment. The husband said. He promised the house would be ours within 2 months. Then he disappeared. No deed, no refund, the jury murmured. The prosecutor projected copies of text messages from Mark, filled with empty promises and excuses. Then came the notary, Jennifer. She looked terrified as she walked to the witness box, her eyes flicking to Mark before fixing on the floor. But when Collins asked her directly, her voice rose clear. Yes, I notarized a power of attorney document for Mark Harris. He brought it to me, already signed. He told me it was legitimate. I now know the signature was forged, and he pressured me to certify it. Mark slammed his cuffed hands on the table. Liar, he shouted. The judge barked for order. The bailiff stepped closer, and the jury stared at him with wide eyes. That outburst did more damage to his case than any testimony could. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, but my resolve sharp. As I swore the oath and sat down, I felt the weight of every year I had lived pressing on me. Mr. Harris, Collins began. Can you tell us what happened to your home? I nodded. I paid that house off over 30 years. I raised my boy there. My wife planted a cherry tree in the backyard before she passed. It was more than a house. It was our life. And one day, I went to the clerk's office and found out it was gone. Stolen, signed away with a forgery of my name. I looked at the jury, letting the silence hang heavy. By my own son. The defense attorney tried to shake me, asking if I had ever given Mark permission, if perhaps I had forgotten signing something. I met his eyes steady. I know my hand. I know my word. And I never gave him that right. When I stepped down, I caught Mark's glare. For the first time, it wasn't smug. It was hate. The trial stretched over days, piece by piece. Samantha and Collins built the wall. Bank records showed transfers from my fake account to Mark's shell company, flagged as fraud. Emails revealed him promising investors impossible returns. Testimonies stacked like bricks. Each one, another weight pressing him down. His defense team tried everything, claimed I was senile, claimed Jennifer was lying to protect herself, claimed the buyers misunderstood deals, but the evidence was too strong, his arrogance too obvious. And then came the closing arguments. Collins stood before the jury. This isn't just fraud. This is betrayal. This is a man who looked his own father in the eye and said, "You'll be fine after robbing him of everything. If we cannot protect the most vulnerable from the closest betrayal, then what does justice even mean?" I saw some jurors wipe their eyes. The jury deliberated only 4 hours. When they filed back in the courtroom, held its breath. "Guilty," the foreman said, "on all counts. Forgery, fraud, elder exploitation." The judge's gavel cracked through the room like thunder. "Mark Harris, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison." I exhaled the weight of months, lifting only to be replaced by something heavier. Relief, yes, but sorrow too. Because no matter how satisfying it was to watch him, led away in cuffs, he was still my son, the boy. It once lifted onto my shoulders at the county fair. The boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while his mother read to him. The boy who had destroyed me and himself. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved at my face. "Mr. Harris, how does it feel to see justice served?" I clutched my briefcase leather, worn from months of battle. "It feels," I said slowly, "like no one ever wins when family turns against itself. But justice matters." And then I pushed through the crowd, stepping into the cold air, feeling the silence after the storm. But the war wasn't over, because even behind bars, Mark's sins still had claws, and they were coming for me. Prison didn't silence Mark, it only stripped away the mask he'd worn for years. The letters started arriving a few weeks after the verdict. The handwriting was his, jagged and rushed, like every word was clawing its way out of him. The first letter was almost casual. "Dad, you don't understand. I had to do it. You've never been in the positions I've been in. If you'd just supported me the way I needed, none of this would have happened. I can still fix it, though. You just have to help me." I tore it in half. The second letter came a month later, full of fury. "You ruined me. You stood in that courtroom and let them drag me through the mud. You're supposed to be my father, not my enemy. You'll regret this." I burned that one in Harold's backyard, watching the flames curl around the paper until nothing remained but ash. The third letter, that one I couldn't ignore. "Dad, I borrowed money from people you don't want to cross. They don't care that I'm locked up. They'll come for what's owed. They'll come for you." I sat in Harold's kitchen, the letter trembling in my hands. For the first time since the trial, I felt that old humiliation creep back, not because of Mark this time, but because his shadow still reached me, even from a cell. The signs started small. A car I didn't recognize parked too long across the street from Harold's. A phone call from a blocked number. A low voice saying, "Your son's debt is your debt." One night coming back from Kroger, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "He may be gone, but his debt isn't." I carried that note in my briefcase for days, staring at it, feeling the old rage rise again. But this time I wasn't the same man who had slept broken in a Walmart parking lot. I had fought a war and won. I wasn't going to cower now. So I called Samantha. Within days, Law enforcement was involved. They tied the threats to one of Mark's debtors, a man with priors for extortion. The police leaned hard, and within weeks the calls stopped. The car vanished. The note was the last whisper from that world. The storm had passed, with Mark locked away and his shadows receding. I finally had space to breathe. I found a small apartment near German Village, a modest place with brick walls and creaky floors, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I had a key. I could turn in a lock that belonged to me, but I didn't retreat into solitude. No, what I'd endured couldn't just be swallowed. It had to be used. I started volunteering at the community center, leading talks for seniors about fraud scams and the dangers of trusting too easily, even when the betrayal comes from family. I brought my battered briefcase with me, opening it in front of them like a relic. Inside were the copies of forged deeds, bank statements and affidavits, proof of what had been done to me. They think we're weak because we're old, I told them. But we've survived too much to be weak. Don't ever forget that I saw fear in their eyes, but also relief. Relief that they weren't alone, that someone had fought back and won. Mark kept writing from prison, but I never answered. Sometimes Harold asked, "Don't you want to at least read what he's saying?" I shook my head. That boy I raised, the one his mother loved, that boy's been gone a long time. What's left of him isn't worth my words. But I'll admit on nights, when the apartment was too quiet, I thought about him, about what he'd be like when he got out, about whether he'd come looking for me. The thought chilled me, but it didn't paralyze me. I'd already beaten him once. If I had to, he'd do it again. Spring afternoon, I walked to Schiller Park. The cherry trees were blooming blossoms, scattering in the wind, pink and white against the Ohio sky. I sat on a bench and watched children chase each other through the grass, their laughter carrying like bells. For a moment I closed my eyes and pictured Hermie wife standing under our cherry tree in the backyard, smiling as Mark ran circles around her. If she could see what had become of him, she would weep. But then I reminded myself he chose his path, and I chose mine. Mine was to fight back. People ask me sometimes if revenge is worth it, if it heals. The truth is it doesn't. Revenge doesn't give you back what you lost. It doesn't stitch up the wound, it leaves scars. But those scars are proof you survived. I may have lost my son, but I did not lose myself, and I never will. The end.